Hi, I'm Nicholas Briggs, and this is The Sirens of Audio.
G'day audiophiles, you are listening to The Sirens of Audio, the podcast that explores the universe of Doctor Who in the audio medium. My name's Dwayne.
And my name is Philip. G'day Dwayne, g'day audiophiles.
G'day Philip. You know what I've been diving into this week?
No, what have you been diving into this week?
I don't know if I've said it before on the podcast, but I've recently got my season 17 Blu-rays.
Right.
You poor little sod, you don't get them.
No, because they don't. Yep, because I don't have a Blu-ray player, and I'm not planning to do it.
No, you're putting your foot down.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes. What's the point? I mean, I've got everything on DVD already, and there's streaming services for most of the new stuff. I haven't bought. The only DVD I buy anything of now is Doctor Who. I have this massive DVD collection. But, at the moment I'm still thinking, I don't want to upgrade to Blu-ray, but it is hurting me just because in terms of the extras and things. But, yeah, at the moment I'm still holding off. But I don't know, I might give in, we'll see.
I've up to Nightmare of Eden now, which is the only story that has had the new special effects treatment on it.
Yep.
And very, very good. I enjoy the enhanced special effects, and I really love this story. It's probably up there with my favourite of the season. It's a guilty favourite because it's usually universally panned in fan circles, isn't it? Nightmare of Eden. Along with Creature from the Pit, which is my other sentimental favourite too. Although when I watch City of Death, I do look at that and I go, man, that is some darn good stuff. But I just think Douglas Adams' stamp on that season, I've come to appreciate that more and more as I've got older, and it is really, really, really clever stuff.
Yeah, it is astounding that we had Douglas Adams.
Yeah.
Like, when you think about it still blows me away. And yeah, I love all that season, but it is partly nostalgia. I mean, I was just the right age when that season came out, and, I adored it at the time, and I still enjoy it now. And, are there faults? Can you see issues with budget? Of course you can. But I don't care, because the stories are great, the dialogue is marvellous, Lala Ward is spectacular. In Horns of Nightmare, she's the Doctor, and she's brilliant. And, Tom Baker's in fine form. What's not to love in that season?
Absolutely. Now, we're going to be speaking with Rob Shearman very shortly, which is very exciting. I can't believe it's taken us this long to chat with him. Philip?
I know it's taken a while, but, he's been a busy person, writing lots and lots of stuff.
Yep.
So glad to finally nail him down.
It's going to be great to chat with him. But before we do, you know what I see?
No.
You do know, don't you?
No.
It's a rabbit hole. Let's go. Right, Philip. So for this rabbit hole, I want to talk very, very briefly about Big Finish companions. Some of the standouts for you and how they might work or whether they don't work. Because we're going to be speaking with Rob very shortly about the companions that he wrote for, but two of the outstanding companions, I think, for Big Finish would have to be Evelyn and Charlie, and Rob's written for both of them. It's incredible how good these companions are, isn't it, Philip?
It really is. There's only been a couple of dud companions, I think, that haven't worked. On the whole, I think Big Finish has done an amazing job. Yeah, Evelyn and Charlie, are two of my favourites. I think Lucy, she was an acquired taste, but certainly she grew on me, and certainly her stories grew on me quite a bit. So she had an impressive arc and storytelling things. The modern companions, Flip and Constance, I think are marvellous. I loved Ehrman. I was very sad to see Ehrman go. I think Ehrman and Perry were so good together. It was a really good dimension for Perry to have. So on the whole, I think the Big Finish campaigns I've mentioned, and there's a couple others. I just don't think who else. Oh, the Eighth Doctor at the moment, Liv Chenka. I mean, Liv is just amazing. I think there's some great campaigns. I think there have been some duds along the way, but you can tend to forget about them because they worked out they were duds pretty quickly. I do think.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. When they Big Finish realizes something's not working, they don't just keep going with it and so we're going to do what we want to do anyway. They will make adjustments, which I think is admirable. Yeah,
they will. And I mean, I can't even tell you that the one I thought was the biggest dud, and I can't think of his name. He was doing
Brewster.
No, I didn't mind Brewster, but I didn't count him as a companion.
Right.
So
he sort of hopped around all.
He hopped around. He travelled a bit with the Doctor, but he was more. Yeah, I didn't consider him a companion. Can I work out who it is? It was the stories in which they were the sort of alternative Sylvester McCoy universe. So he was with. I liked her. She was Klein, was it? I'm just gone now.
It's been so long since I've heard those. I didn't know there was anyone apart from Klein.
Yeah, no, there was a trilogy of Klein stories, and there's a male companion that they tried to add in, and he was dreadful.
Okay.
And it's not the actor's fault. Fully blame the conception of the character. He was just pathetic and whiny and awful. Right. And he's just in 3, and he actually, I think, really let the whole trilogy down. So I think that Klein trilogy didn't work, even though there's some good stories in there. I can't think of her name. It's so sad. Anyhow, that's because I've never gone back and listened to them again. He was a dud. I think Kara's struggled, especially when they came back to our universe. And I think it was a very clever idea in terms of the chameleon sort of character. But it took me a long time to work out the fact that he was picking up the personalities of the people he was with, not just how they were looking. But yeah, on the whole, I think what Big Finish has done has been pretty amazing in terms of thinking outside the box when creating the companions. I mean, Charlie's a pretty typical companion and worked really well with the Eighth Doctor. I think it's what it needed. But Evelyn was thinking outside the box in a big way and just worked so perfectly with the Sixth Doctor.
That's why I think, in terms of my personal favourites, I would have to say, because of that fact that Evelyn was so much outside the box, I would say my personal favourite would have to be Evelyn and the Sixth Doctor. I wonder how she'd go with... it's been a while since I heard her in A Death in the Family. I think that's the story that she has a chat with the Seventh Doctor. But, yeah, absolutely sensational. Another one that I was a little disappointed didn't stick around for longer was Mary Shelley. They only had her for 3 stories.
Trilogy of 3 plus the companion.
Plus the single episode from Company of Friends, yeah. So that was really cool to have her, a real historical figure, travelling with the Doctor for a while. That was unusual and different. Don't know if it's been so long since I've heard them. I don't know if the stories let that trilogy down a little towards the end there, but I really enjoyed having her on the TARDIS as well.
Yeah, she was good. There were some possible rumours that they may be bringing her back for another little run as well. It was sort of raised on, I think, the Big Finish podcast that someone mentioned in a letter, and Nick was a bit coy. So you never know. She may still reappear.
Oh, if Nick's a bit coy, watch this space.
Exactly.
All right, that'll do us for a little chat about Big Finish companions, and we'll jump out of this rabbit hole. We'll come back in a moment with Rob Shearman.
Doctor Who, The Holy Terror.
That's it. That's the idea. Find somewhere to hide.
I remember the pleasure you took as a child, pulling the wings off flies. But where has all that evil gone, Childrick?
There's no escape from me. I intend to usurp the throne from my brother, and I shall be emperor and god instead.
Okay, guys, now, before you do anything hasty or violent...
It's a bird!
Yeah. It talks!
It's a miracle!
Fascinating. So, what you've got here is your good old-fashioned polytheistic religion, but with a monotheistic structure. You can worship lots of gods, but only one at a time.
I decided long ago that I would become god.
And what is down there?
Your new messiah.
Tell me, what will you do with your great powers?
Kill.
And what else?
Destroy.
And what else?
There is nothing else. After I have destroyed everyone in the castle, I will destroy the castle, and I shall be alone with my father.
The legacy of my evil shall be eternal.
Hey, do you mind? What's a guy gotta do to get some privacy around here?
We're in trouble. The TARDIS is out of control.
The TARDIS is always out of control. Is it worth interrupting my bath time? It's embarrassing. I'm all naked here.
Frobisher, you're the shape of a penguin. You're always naked.
Well, that's what you think. I usually morph myself a black and white pair of pants as well.
Well, it's our very great pleasure today to have with us a guest we've been trying to get on for a while. He's very busy, and we are so thrilled to finally have him because he's one of our favourites on Big Finish, but also more than just Big Finish, he's a favourite in other areas as well. It's the wonderful Robert Shearman. Robert,
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
So where are we speaking to you from? Where are you?
I'm from my upstairs office. I've actually got now 2 offices, which is ridiculous because I now do half the work, in both. I'm in my upstairs office in my house in South London. And it's just gone 1 a.m, and my wife's gone to bed. And that's often my sort of most creative time anyway. I've always enjoyed working nights. I think it sort of stems back from the time that when I was going to school. And I always thought if I could just get out of ever having to have early mornings, that's what I do for my living. And that's what I do now. I mean, I basically sleep until about noon, get up and don't do very much in the daytime. And then I actively work from the evening onwards and just go into the small hours. It makes me feel like it makes me feel like I'm sort of doing something slightly naughty. But it's fun, it's nice. I really like nighttime.
Yeah, I must admit I'm a big night person myself. Would happily sleep in every morning.
It is the best. And actually, that is the best part. It isn't so much working at night. It's knowing that you can just miss mornings, because mornings are rubbish. Mornings are terrible times of day. And I will do anything I can to give myself a reason to avoid getting up in the morning.
Now, can you tell us a bit about your background? I mean, you were a writer of... It's interesting looking through your career because you've actually moved through different types of writing in sort of blocks. So you started, I guess, it says a playwright was your original sort of big formula. Then you moved into scripts, and of course we'll talk about that briefly. The marvelous Daleks script, but also scripts for Big Finished, and now you've become much more of an author in terms of books. Do you want to tell us originally in terms of why did writing appeal to you as something to do when you were young?
I'm not quite sure where it originally came from. I know that I'm told by my parents that when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I was picking books off the shelf in my dad's library and copying them out and pretending that they were books that I'd written, which is, obviously deeply plagiarist. And then I would translate them into other languages from dictionaries my dad had, not accurately because I didn't know the languages, but I just take the words and look them up. And then so I used to sort of just want to be a writer. And I don't really know where that came from. I know that I had a terrible stammer when I was in my teens in particular, but it went on well into my 30s. And I began to find that if I couldn't speak very easily, certainly writing drama and writing scripts allowed me just to, just be able to have other people say things. And even for myself, I mean, I began trying to shake off my stammer by doing some acting. And I was an awful actor at school. But nevertheless, I realised quite quickly that if I could go on stage and shout, it was a different... and I was a really unsubtle performer, but it made me believe that I could, get all that frustration of not being able to talk very easily out. And then when I began writing stage plays, and I was 17, 18 years old, and I began really doing it properly as I was leaving school, I realised pretty quickly I wouldn't want anyone as bad as me ever to be in them. So that's when I began just thinking of myself as a writer. And it just carried really on from there. So I was writing pretty obsessively from about sort of my late teens always.
Now, one of my favourite playwrights is Alan Ayckbourn. Anything he writes is just hilarious, and I've been taking my kids along we've got a lot of productions have started in Sydney, and I've been taking my kids to see some things. I took them to see the Norman Conquests. We saw all 3 plays in one day, and they've fallen in love with them as much as I have. Now, you've done a bit of work with Alan. So what was your connection with Alan Ayckbourn?
Well, I mean, he was a sort of idol of mine, really. When I was in my teens, my family didn't go to the theatre very much. My dad loved amateur dramatics, but we didn't actually go to the theatre very much. But there was always around in the 80s, the BBC would do a Christmas stage play on TV, and they did a few Eight-Borns, and I used to love them. We used to video them and watch them back and back all the time. And that's what I wanted to be as a comedy writer. I wanted to be like Alan Ayckbourn. And when I began writing plays, I wrote a really fairly dark one that was staged at a drama festival in Scarborough, which is where Alan lives. My wife, Heather Stoney, she's now Lady Heather Ayckbourn, came to see it and brought me to Alan's attention. So I sort of kind of met him a few times. I did my dissertation on Ayckbourn's work as well. I was at university. And so about a couple of years into being a professional writer, Alan gave me a call and said, we'd like you to come and write for us at my theatre. And I went along and I had dinner with him, which was terrifying, partly because I had my stammer, but also because he's quite a shy writer, a shy man himself. And so we both sort of just found it quite hard, I think, to communicate to begin with. But I wrote half a dozen plays for him over the next 6-7 years. And it was great. I mean, he was like a mentor, really. I mean, I just loved working with him. And he's a fascinating writer because he's so playful about how to do structure. He would, as you say, Norman Conquest is a play where, if people don't know it, it's 3 plays which run simultaneously in the same house in different rooms. So the way to see the play's chronology is that you see Act 1 of one of the plays, then Act 1 of another one of the plays, and it's the same characters, but they're just moving to different rooms all the time. I mean, it's incredibly clever. And he'd do plays which ran backwards, and he had he still has, he's still going strong, thank God. But he also really liked the invention of science fiction. So I began to find that when I was writing my increasingly strange plays for Alan, that it kind of tapped into a sort of a desire to tell fairly weird stories that I then brought over into my short fiction now, but also into Doctor Who, which it didn't feel like it was that strange a journey from them, really. You just take out some of the jokes and then you've still got these weird paradoxical stories.
I mean, Alan tends to have, very biting humour, very I'd say common situations and settings, extraordinary characters. Your writing tends to have extraordinary characters, but you also go a bit more bizarre with the settings.
I think. I mean, especially as time has gone on. I mean, I think I've just got a bit mad now, really. I mean, I come up with some really weird stuff. When I was writing for the theatre, there's only really so much weirdness a traditional audience in the regions of the UK could necessarily cope with. So, I did a play which was a big time travel play, but it was nevertheless quite domestic. Whereas now I'll do any old strange thing, really. I mean, that's when, one of the reasons why I did The Holy Terror. Way back in 99, I wrote it, I think, and I was at that time writing for Alan, and I had an idea of a play which could be based upon the idea of, I think King James I had this notion that if you were to take 2 babies and separate them from all other human contact, that the language they would develop to talk to themselves as innocents would be the language of God. And I remember saying to Alan, I could do that as a stage play for Scarborough. And he said, I really don't think that's going to work. And so you get these ideas sometimes and you sort of shore them away. And when Doctor Who came along and came asking, which was really exciting, I thought, I can do those stories then. So it was just like sort of stepping a little bit a bit sideways and but still having the same desire to sort of tell funny comedies, which are quite dark because Alan's plays are very, very dark. And my work is quite dark. So it didn't seem like that strange an idea to bring dark comedy into the short stories I do or into doing Doctor Who or anything. I mean, it's just what I like writing.
So let's step back again. So we talked about why you started writing. How did you get into Doctor Who, and what's your Doctor Who memories as a child and moving forward?
Well, I was really scared to watch it when I was a small kid. If they brought on, because it was such a fixture over here every Saturday, it seemed every Saturday, I'd turn on the TV and there would be that time tunnel with Tom Baker's face. And I was terrified of that. I mean, just the sound of the music used to have me running from the room. I've always been quite scared I still am very scared of movies. I can't watch horror films very easily because in my head they build themselves up as something which is far scarier than they really are. And I didn't dare watch Tom Baker, and he left in 81, as we know. I was 11, and it coincided with going to school and a friend of mine doing a school report on the history of Doctor Who. And he brought out this huge scroll with all the stories on, from An Unearthly Child to Logopolis. And I just thought that was amazing, because what I realized about myself was I love lists. I just love long lists of things. I used to memorize them a lot. And suddenly I thought, I don't have to watch the show, but look at all those titles. And so I got hold of The Making of Doctor Who, the Terence Dix guidebook, and I got the Doctor Who program guide by Jean-Marc Officier. And by the time that Doctor Who started its next season, which was with Castrovalva for Peter Davison, I'd become a fan without having ever watched an episode all the way through, because I just loved the idea, and I'd read a few targets. And so there I was at 11 years old watching Castrovalva and saying to my sister, who was much braver than I was and had been watching it already, when they'd do little jokes about the Brigadier and the Ice Warriors, I'd say, well, in fact, the Brigadier didn't ever meet the Ice Warriors. And I was already a kind of a strange, annoying type of fan whilst watching my first story, which was a bit weird. So I sort of fell in love with its history, and I became, I did a fanzine at school with my friend, and we interviewed lots of people, but I wrote, terribly humorless clinical reviews of things based upon whether or not they took themselves seriously or not. And so for a long time, I just had this sort of I just loved just how much Doctor Who there was. And I just thought that having so much of it was, I can't imagine what I'd have felt if I was a young kid now coming along and there's 60 years of it. But at that stage, it seemed almost impossible that there was 18 years worth of this history to sort of go into.
But your knowledge is astounding. I remember when we were together, you came to a convention in Sydney, which I think was early 2006, and we were on the same table with India Fisher for a trivia night. Yeah. And our table blitzed it. And most of that was your work. That there was hardly a question that got asked that you just didn't know immediately the answer to.
I'm not so good now. I mean, Toby Haydock, who, of course, I've done a couple of books with, he's astonishing about cast lists. I used to be very good at cast lists because I'd memorized them all from, again, the Doctor Who program guide. But I remember at that thing, actually, Debbie Watling was there.
Yep.
Of course, because she was the guest. And she got really thrown by it because she'd spent the convention assuming I was a professional, which I am. And she said to me, oh, so you wrote for the new series? I said, yes, that's right. And so we began chatting. And then she saw me at that quiz and she said, but you said that you wrote for it. And I said, I did. She said, but you're a fan. I said, I'm both. And she said, well, that makes no sense. And of course, it came from a time of the show when Fraser and Debbie, who were over there as well, were doing it, when, it was you're either a fan or you were a professional, but you couldn't really be both. So I remember Debbie just being totally puzzled by the fact that I could sit there and know all about her own stories, because I shouldn't have done. I should have only known about my Chris Eccleston experience. But no, it's telling her that, yes, well, your last appearance actually was in the Wheel in Space episode 1, not as commonly believed in Through from the Deep episode 6, because you appear on the scanner. And she'd say, oh, just shut up.
I guess that's the thing about when this show came back, is it was brought back by people who loved it originally.
Yeah.
And the more we talk to people, in Australia we have a very strong tradition of Doctor Who in terms of it was a program on every night continuously, all year round. So, 6 o'clock or 6:30 every night, it just kept replaying over and over again. And so most people here have a memory. But in terms of English people or British people, you guys have a much bigger tradition in terms of Doctor Who being more fundamental to part of the culture.
Yeah, and yet, of course, also absent often from the screens. I mean, so much of the 80s was spent with fans like me, but, at the conventions I'd go to, feeling a sort of awful hope that one day the BBC might actually repeat some of them. But we had so few repeats ever. And if we got repeats, it was generally a couple of stories from the season previously. And yet we knew that in Australia, in the States, you were getting these vast reruns. And we were the way I was able to watch the old ones was because I met friends who would get sent videotapes from Australia. So I was watching, my first times I was watching John Pertwee stories were with the Australian announcer having a laugh about Men in Green. I think there was one for the Green Death that I remember being very, very funny. It's like, I'm not going to attempt the accent, but saying things like, well, if you're going to come back next week, we'll see how that man in green turns out. And of course, I think for an awful lot of us, that became as important a part of the John Pertwee experience, was that we were watching it with these Australian continuity announcers. So yeah, it was something that we couldn't quite imagine that in other countries they were watching Doctor Who all the time.
Yeah, I often say that my doctor was John Pertwee, and I see other fans who say their doctor was John Pertwee. They're always 10 years older than me. So yeah. Because the constant reruns through the 80s, well, the third Doctor was my doctor. I just saw him 10 years after he was originally on the screen.
I mean, it's one of those funny things that I would go to conventions in the 80s and people would ask, where did you start? And of course, I began with Davison, which meant that for so many years, well into the time when the show ended its first run, people tended to look at me as if saying, oh, right, so you came in quite late. And there was a certain sense that I wasn't quite as cool as other fans but of course, that's what's so wonderful nowadays about it, is that genuinely you can go to a convention and meet a 7-year-old kid whose favourite Doctor is John Pertwee or Patrick Troughton, because they're watching them. They don't see it as being something which has been, hidden away from them behind years and years before they were born. It's all there on the shelves. I think that's rather hard to get my head around at times, but I think it's also incredible. I think that the fact that fans now can just say, I fancy watching a cartoon version of the Macra Terror, or possibly I could even hear a talking book of it, or read a novelization of it, or anything like that, when we were so starved for information. I remember, not knowing what the Macra Terror was. It wasn't novelized. It was just a paragraph in a couple of guidebooks. And I memorized the cast list, but I didn't know anything else about it. So the fact that fans can come along now and they have access to so much stuff, I think is really just gobsmackingly wonderful. I mean, I think it's, and the fact that things like Big Finish exist, which offer, I suppose, 1,000+ stories now, I suppose.
More than that.
Yeah. I mean, over Christmas, I wasn't very well over Christmas, and for fun, I started just thinking it'd be quite fun to have a sort of a list, because I like lists, they always cheer me up, of every single Doctor Who story ever in alphabetical order. And I spent a few days on it, and I reached about 7,000 stories, including things like comics and spin-offs and short stories. And I thought, this is far bigger than I even guessed. I mean, I in my head, I thought there'll be 1,000, a couple of thousand maybe, and that will be remarkable. But it's so much more than that. It's actually so much more than anyone can now experience. And I find that really strange. I mean, I remember all those wilderness years when the show wasn't on the air, and before Big Finish started, when you basically all you had were a couple of books each month, which is still quite a lot, and the TV show from the past. But we never thought that was going to come back. And it felt like still a very, very containable canon, if I can even stand to use the word canon. But the whole thing was, you could kind of experience it all. Yep. Whereas now, I don't know how anybody could possibly experience all Doctor Who is, because there's just far, far, far too much of it to do so, which I think is actually, at times I find quite frightening, and I'm a little bit jealous about it. Other times I think that's the most amazing thing. I just, that people can have their entirely own unique experiences finding their way through their Doctor Who's that I'll never know.
Please leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts. And please like, share, subscribe and comment on our YouTube videos. Then you shall be like us. We've mentioned the Holy Terror a couple of times, but there was one story that you wrote that sort of danced around the fringes of the Doctor Who universe prior to that, which was called Punchline, which I really, really enjoy this one. What memories do you have of that one?
Well, that's part of the same thing, really. I mean, I kind of made a move accidentally into radio writing because a couple of my plays for Scarborough with Akeborn, the BBC wanted to do their own versions of them. So I began finding I was doing BBC Radio 4 work, which led into writing original work for Radio 4. And what first happened was that I was contacted before BBV with Punchline. I was contacted by Gary Russell, who was working very closely with Nick Pegg at that point, and Nick had been at university with me. And Gary had asked Nick whether he knew of any professional writers who did radio who also loved Doctor Who, and Nick thought of me. So I got this invitation from Gary to pitch a Tom Baker story, because they thought at that point they were trying to get hold of Tom. And I came up with a sort of vague idea of what the Holy Terror was, but it was much stupider. And I think the idea basically was that the Doctor arrives on a planet and there's a big statue of him and everyone has to wear a scarf. And it was rubbish, really. It was really awful. I didn't write a script. And Gary came back and said, yes, we'd like that, but do it with Colin instead. But that was some months later. And in the meantime, I've been talking, because I now got back involved in Doctor Who again, in various chat groups. And I was asked by Paul Ebbs, who was at BBV, he said suddenly, well, you're doing an audio, you're a radio writer, and you're doing a Doctor Who soon. Could you do a quick emergency script for us? Because something's fallen through, and we've only got Sylvester rather than Sophie and Sylvester on a particular day, and we needed something by next week. And so I went that weekend and just wrote Punchline. And it was recorded a few days later. And it was just something terribly small. And I went to the recording, and that was fun. And then Sylvester went home. And then I remember that they checked and it hadn't been recorded. So we had to call Sylvester back and do it again. And he had to come back in a taxi. And it was fun. And I felt that I shouldn't put my name on it, really, because I had promised Big Finish that I would go with them first. And I knew at that stage there was a certain, not animosity, but there was certainly a sort of competitive thing between Big Finish and BBV. And I think that Gary quite rightly felt that it would be, he didn't want me to have been a writer that BBV started with, especially when they had come to me first and Holy Terror was already commissioned. So I thought it would be funnier to try and change the name of the writer of Punchline to a sitcom character. So I chose Jeremy Ledbetter, which is actually not quite the right name for Jerry Ledbetter from The Good Life, but that was me trying to be clever. And I've not really heard it since. I mean, I gather that people still quite like it. I think it's on YouTube, isn't it?
It's very funny.
I'm not sure where you can get it, but it's...
And I think it sounds okay, but I suspect it could be quite annoying if I listen to it for too long. It's a bit of a... I'm not trying to put it down, but it's over 20 years ago. It's a bit of a one-joke idea, I think. But that's pretty... But it seemed a bit like a way into Holy Terror as well. It was great to work with Sylv. I really enjoyed that. And I think it was a nice production, I think. But I haven't heard the Big Finishes either for a very, very long time. But I remember thinking when I heard it, that's about as long as you could do this. and you're just about running out of ideas at the point this ends. But I think it's quite well remembered, I think, which makes me quite happy. I think those who listen to
it wasn't just the name. You had elements of The Good Life in the story itself. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all about just trying to do a sitcom. Doctor Who's stuck in a sitcom world, and of course, I wasn't allowed to make him the Doctor, but that seemed okay because that could be part of it. He didn't really know who he was, so I got away with it. I began to find it all rather annoying when BBV, understandably, had to start calling him the Dominie, and I thought, well, I'm not doing that. What I'll do is not call him anything, and that means we can sort of pretend it's proper Doctor Who. Again, at a time when the idea of doing proper Doctor Who seemed such a rarity. I mean, now, as I say, there's so much of it that doesn't really seem to be the case. But at the time, it seemed quite magical to be sort of doing a pretend Doctor Who script.
Darling, what are you doing on the floor?
And this must be your good wife, Perkins.
Darling, please get off the floor. We have visitors.
And of course you can't see this machine either.
Well, I must say she's a stunner. Could quite go for her myself.
Darling, please leave it alone. You know how bad you are with DIY. Why, don't you remember that humorous episode when you tried to replace the light bulb and we had to call out the emergency services?
It's perfectly safe, darling. There's nothing here, is there? I wonder what will happen if I break this one.
No, don't. Please, darling. Seeing you lying on the floor on our anniversary, it's embarrassing. On your feet and give Sir a top-up.
He's already had a top-up. Now, you can't hear this either. Is that right? Let me just loosen this screw here. Oh, oops. Oh, wrong screw. But I'm getting there.
If only I were 20 years younger and not married to Mrs. Sir. She's built like an apricot, you know.
Quiet, you. I'm talking to my husband.
Oh, sorry.
Just leave the bloody thing alone.
And if I just give a little tap here... Is there something wrong, darling? You look a little pale.
Nothing at all, darling, except you've just broken a perfectly good canned Laughtertron. I'll have to call the repairman in now.
A canned what?
A canned Laughtertron. Every home has got one. They're all the rage in Suburpton.
I have to say I thought it was a particularly good canned Laughtertron too. I said so as soon as I came in.
5 minutes ago you couldn't even see this machine.
Don't be ridiculous, Perkins. I know a top-of-the-range Laughtertron when I see one.
So, the logic changes as we go along.
So with the Holy Terror, whose decision was it to put Frobisher in as the Doctor's companion?
Oh, that would be Gary. Yeah. I mean, I remember that being the sort of invitation. It was do it with Colin and, a walking, talking, shape-shifting penguin. And of course, I was familiar with Frobisher because I'd been a Doctor Who fan in the 80s. But in spite of what I pretended at the time in interviews, I'd never really read the comics. I think mostly because, again, I had a very severe, solemn idea of canon at that point. And if it wasn't on TV, I didn't count it. And also, it was funny. And I didn't have a very good sense of humour as a Doctor Who fan in my teens. I thought all Doctor Who should be very, very solemn. And, people should be, there should be lots of military people shooting everybody. And so, yeah, it was odd. I went and read a few Frobisher strips and thought he was a great character. And just wrote it quite quickly and just thought, well, the only way I can make this character work is if he would always think of himself as the lead character. It always seems to be quite strange if you watch a Doctor Who story, up until the new series, actually, where that's got somewhat fudged. The companions seem to understand that they are the secondary characters. And that's how they act. Whereas Frobisher, I thought, just saw himself as the lead. And it was his adventure. The Doctor probably was his companion. And to write that, but also not make him too obnoxious, was the real key to it. So it was good fun writing Holy Terror. And I honestly thought as I did it, this is the only one I'll ever do. I was a bit reluctant to do it. My wife, my now wife, said to me at the time when I got the offer, she said, and I said, well, I'm trying to do important theatre work. And she said, oh, just get over yourself. You're a massive Doctor Who fan. And of course you want to do this. And so you should. And she said, it'll only be the one-off. You'll never do another one. And I said, okay. And so I went into Holy Terror genuinely thinking this was going to be my one and only attempt to do a proper Doctor Who story. And it's kind of why it's such a long script, I think, because it is, I remember, terribly long. I do think it should have been, I really should have cut it down a bit, but it was, I was showing off.
We'll give our thanks to Jane for that encouragement.
Yes, no, I mean, I often do thank her, because I know that if she hadn't have pushed me forward, I mean, my life would be very, very different. Doctor Who really did divert my career. So, and massively for the better. I mean, the freedom I have to write what I do now mostly comes from the fact that Doctor Who just sort of opened my mind to do it. I mean, Holy Terror was a very, very important script for me, actually, as a result, because it just let me go a bit crazy. And I'd always kind of felt I couldn't go that crazy before, so...
You continue the crazy. We're going to jump now. I'll come back to in a moment. But the Maltese Penguin. So once again, you brought back Frobisher.
Yeah.
And even more so is he's the main character of the story. It's all told through Frobisher's eyes.
Yes.
Once again, how did that get commissioned? How do you end up doing another Frobisher?
It was an odd thing, because Holy Terror wasn't successful at all. I mean, no one bought it. I think it did quite well in the magazine poll. I think it may even have won. I think it won, but no one had bought it. So it was a sort of strange thing where the people who had listened to it had all given it a high mark, and it just somehow came through. I think that what the concern was at the time from Big Finish was that they'd put a sort of short trips and side steps or whatever banner on it, so that if you were having to buy a CD every month, you could say, well, this one doesn't count. So people didn't buy it for a long time. So it's the oddest thing. I think when Holy Terror did well in the polls, Gary thought it might be quite good fun if we had a special subscribers release, not within the actual, not one of the monthly releases, and another Frobisher story. And I was the Frobisher guy, so they came to me and said, would you do one? And I thought, well, the only other gag I can think of with the Maltese Penguin would to do a story where effectively Frobisher is disguised as the Doctor for a lot of it. And so Colin Baker gets to play Frobisher, while Robert Jessup also plays Frobisher in that sort of noirish narrator voice. So that was kind of the whole point of it. I mean, I don't think it's a particularly deep story.
I listened to it recently, and I was laughing out loud. I was out for a walk with headphones on, and people were looking at me because I was bursting out with laughter at various points, because it is so funny. Like, it's probably one of the funniest Big Finishes I've ever done.
It was a real attempt to write a really dense comedy with tons of gags in, because again, that was my background. I'm a comedy writer, so I just thought, well, it might be quite funny to do. And I'd just written, obviously, Chimes of Midnight Has Come just before that, and I think I'm inclined to go a bit grim, I've noticed, when I extend the story to maybe 4 episodes. But I thought it'd be really nice, since it's only an hour long, to do something which is just genuinely there with to pound you with jokes, even if the story itself is kind of throwaway. I thought that might be a fun thing. And it does have some quite good gags in it, I think.
It really does.
With one flipper, I reach for the bottle of bourbon, with the other for my automatic pistol. I've learned that both are the best friends a Seamus can have. This way, whether my visitor was friend or foe, one of the flippers would have something suitable to offer him. Boldly, I called out for the stranger to come in. Come in! Oh, it's you.
Hello, Frobisher. My word, you're as white as a sheet. Very unusual for a penguin. Makes you look quite exotic. Are you all right?
Yeah, sure, I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be?
Well, you are pointing a gun at me. Oh, and a bottle of something vaguely alcoholic.
Sorry.
It's hard to tell which one would be the more lethal.
His friends called him the Doctor. His enemies did too. And the Galactic Reader's Digest never called him anything, because he wasn't the type to get junk mail.
Do you usually threaten your clients? I mean, I'm not criticizing. Just curious.
You can't be too careful in a job like mine, Doc.
Oh, well, I dare say you know best. So, this is your office, is it? Oh dear. It's a bit grimy, isn't it?
I like it grimy.
Well, yes, I know, but there's grime. There's grime, isn't there? I mean, are the walls meant to be that shiny brown, or is it something growing on them?
Perhaps you could tell me what it is you want, Doc? I had employed the doctor as my assistant on numerous occasions. He might not look like much, but underneath the unruly curly hair and the garish multicolored coat, there is a mind with a deductive skill nearly equal to my own. I strictly work freelance, but I was so impressed by his potential that I had many times considered offering him full-time employment.
You know, I think these stains are alive, Frobisher. Fascinating.
Now was not one of those times.
So we recently celebrated the 20th anniversary of Charms of Midnight, which has just come out. It's hard to believe it's 20 years. This is probably renowned, in terms of anybody in Big Finish. You say, number one Big Finish story. Chimes is, always there in terms of the top 2 or 3 lists every time. Did you have any idea when you were writing it was going to be as successful and loved now as it was then?
No. I actually thought it was awful. I gave it to Janie to read, and I said, I don't think this is any good. And she read it and said, it's really funny and weird. And I said, yeah, they're not going to like it though, are they? She said, well, they might. I sent it in to Big Finish half expecting that they would turn around and say, well, we liked your Penguin one, and we gave you another chance. Because at the Holy Terror recording, Gary said to me, you do us another one? And I said, sure, because it was great. I was there with Colin Baker and Sam Kelly and having a great time. I said, yeah, I'll do you another one. And then Chimes was such a quick commission because they had the Paul McGann series. The odd thing about it was that, all the Paul McGanns were quite strange thinking about it, because we had to do that second series before the first series came out. And I had to write Scherzo before Zagreus was written. So there was always a sense in which you were having to play catch up to something which hadn't been released yet. So for those first 2 seasons of Paul McGann up to Neverland, we were all writing effectively for a Doctor that we hadn't heard yet. So Chimes for me was my trying to go in and trying to do my take on a generic Doctor, I suppose, but trying to sort of say, well, I hadn't heard Storm Warning. All I knew about Storm Warning was that I'd been given scripts, but I knew that, obviously rescued from the R101. And I think that also I got that wrong. I remember that the whole point of that 6-part series we were doing was that I was meant to be writing the nice comedy one at the beginning of the series. And then they'd get into the story arc. And of course, my story is incredibly story arc heavy, which they weren't intending it to be. And so they had to shift it down to the second release. And no one seemed to mind much. They were very kind to me, actually. I gave the script in, they came back and they said that they'd really, really enjoyed it. And they would record it in about 14 months' time, because it was... No, that isn't true. We had to record it and then we'd release it 14 months later. That's it. So it was all a big rush. But yeah, I'm just waffling really, but I spent all the time that we were doing Chimes still half expecting that the fact I'd written it in a great hurry without really knowing what I was doing until I reached the end of it would be such an obvious giveaway. And that I also knew it was basically the Holy Terror again. It's the same story, really. Once again, you're in this sort of strange fantasy world with people living out stereotypes. And I thought, it's a different set of stereotypes. And I think it's about more, because it's about the class structure and my feelings about that. And it was, I think, a more recognizable and perhaps much more identifiable location. But I still thought it was every possibility that people would just find it a bit irritating. And I did feel as I was writing it that it kind of just runs on the spot. All I had to do was get it to midnight at the end of every episode and kill somebody again, and I could just spin it again.
But the way you kill people, it's hilarious.
Yeah, I wanted to do this thing where it was because I really love Christmas, but also because it's such a ritualized time of year. I mean, the idea of people being killed according to... I wanted at one point someone to have their throat slashed with a broken Christmas ball, but I couldn't find a good way of doing that. So I wanted all the deaths to be very, very Christmas related. And then I gave up on that because it wasn't actually tenable. But yeah, I wanted to be quite jolly with those deaths. I wanted them to be quite funny. I mean, I really wanted there to be a really nice comedy sound effect when they pulled the plunger off Missy Sadler's face. And I think that they did one. I think that's what they did. Yeah. But I wanted it to be quite a funny script. And I'm always quite surprised when people come back to me years later, because I'm surprised that it's so popular, because I really am, and I'm thrilled by it. And I don't take anything away from that. I mean, I'm so thrilled that people love it. But I'm always surprised that people find it scary, because I thought it was just an out-and-out comedy. But it does seem to get under people's skin, which I think is smashing.
There's constant clock ticking. I mean, Gary talks about the fact that he, Nick, and I think Barnaby Edwards, three of them read it together to check the timings, and all three of them knew when they were reading it that it was a classic they were reading. But you as a writer, I mean, a lot of the writers we speak to are very down on themselves and down on their writing. Do you struggle to see stuff that you do as positive? And do you ever write stuff and say, this is brilliant and wonderful? Or is it always you struggle with it?
I was reading back in preparation for this a bit, the Big Finish Guide to the Audio Adventures. And I got really annoyed at myself in the book because I'm very down on the stories. And I thought, that's not how I feel about them. I'm really proud of them. I think they're actually all very good. I think particularly from this point on, 20 years on, I'm quite arrogant about them, actually. I think Chimes is really great. I heard it again in lockdown for the first time in years to do an online Twitter thing. And I thought, this is really fab. I'm really enjoying it. And generally now I look back quite smugly at my audios. And I don't know. I think that there is a certain degree of... I think you have to be quite self-critical about what you've done. But as the years go by, if it's worked, then you have to let that go and just say, well, it worked. I mean, I think that I love Chimes now far more than I did for years after it was out. I think I was always slightly not embarrassed by it, but a bit puzzled by it being so popular. Whereas now I just think, great. I mean, every year around Christmas time, people on my Twitter feed do their annual listen to Chimes of Midnight. And I'm really, really moved by that, because I could never have guessed that my 29-year-old self, 30-year-old self, whenever it was, could write something that decades later people were still enjoying, because that isn't how you expect things to be, particularly not when you've been in the theatre, where shows would open and they'd run for a few months and then they would close, and that would be it. I mean, everything felt so ephemeral. And suddenly, Doctor Who, again, I didn't expect, because Doctor Who was effectively dead when I was writing for it for the Big Finish, I didn't expect these things would still be listened to a year or two later, let alone 20 years later.
Well, Charlie, where are we?
I don't know, Doctor. It's too dark. You were supposed to be getting me to Singapore, 1930, remember?
An Edwardian Christmas. How lovely.
I never much liked plum pudding. Cook always used to make far too much of it, and we were still picking our way through it by New Year.
Oh, I love a bit of plum pudding, no?
Charlie, there'll be a death here soon.
Edith, what are you saying? Whose death?
I can make you warmer than that fire ever could.
Can't you just leave it, I said?
I only wanted a kiss.
Always been your favourite, ever since you were a little girl.
It certainly has. You'll make me plum pudding forever, won't you? Even when I'm grown up?
There'll be another murder soon, and everyone will forget me. Don't you forget me, Charlie.
Oh.
Mr. Shaughnessy, you're pointing a gun at us?
Yes, sir.
That's not a very nice way for a well-bred butler to behave, is it?
You are not to go upstairs. It is not our place. We only go upstairs when we are summoned.
Please, don't leave me here on my own. Doctor! Doctor, where are you?
Of course, it's not proof. I mean, I suppose I could be lying when I said I didn't kill her.
Oh, yes. As of course could I.
Stands to reason. Once you've committed murder, a bit of fibbing is hardly going to bother your conscience, is it?
It's mocking us. Whatever this force is, it's mocking us.
So there is something, very, very touching about the fact that I did half a dozen stories, which are all, I think, quite fondly remembered. And it makes me terribly happy, actually, that I sort of felt like I always sort of got away with Doctor Who. I never really did one, I think, that is absolutely hated. So it's quite nice.
Nothing comes close to being hated. We'll get to one which people are still divided on, but we'll get to that in a moment. So Jubilee, you got to write for the Daleks for the first time. How did that come about?
That was an odd commission. That was to do with doing an animation. So Gary asked me whether if I could for some reason they thought of me as a writer who could do things very, very quickly, which is not how I am at all nowadays. But back then they had this idea that they wanted to do 6 10-minute episodes for animation. And could I do it now? And I had a week. And I came up with an idea in the bath for a really, really simple idea of a doctor going to the Tower of London where there was a single Dalek which was going to be executed in public. And I gave that to Gary, and he sat in it for a bit and then came back and said, I think there's actually more mileage in this, and we're running out of time anyway. So he did real time, and I was left to develop Jubilee, which became this enormously inflated script. I mean, that is, of all the ones I did, the one that I really wish I could do an edit on, and also change the ending for as well. My justification for it was, at the time I was working with Chris Chibnall. I was doing my first TV series, Born and Bred, and I was getting really heavily into rewrites on that. And I had to ask permission from the production team whether I could go off for a couple of weeks to write this big finish audio. And Chris, being a big Doctor Who fan, said, yeah, sure, off you go. I mean, so they sorted it in so I could go off and do Jubilee. So I just sat down, and Born and Bred, being this sort of BBC One Sunday night show, was terribly happy. We had a huge cast, none of whom were ever really allowed to be unpleasant because they were a lovable elderly cast. So I made Jubilee the polar opposite. It's just people being really vicious. And I was working a lot with Martin Jarvis and Ros Ayres at the time for BBC Radio, and they agreed to do it because they were my friends. And so it was a strange sort of anti-BBC thing. I was doing so much BBC work at that point, and Jubilee was me doing the polar opposite of what I was doing in my daytime. So yeah, it was odd. I mean, it sort of just grew, that story, and then I, as I say, I kind of muffed the ending, and I realised that what I didn't want was some sort of reset button. I knew I had to because I'd changed history, but I left it fairly vague, and I said to Gary, "How about we leave it so that really did happen in 1903, and then I come back." 10 stories down the road, I'll do another release set in 1903 and do the first half of the Jubilee story and then resolve everything. But do it so the Doctor and Evelyn do that first adventure that we only hear about in Jubilee. And Gary said no, which I think was fine. I think he just said, just resolve your story. And I said, all right. And I didn't make a very good job of it because I think I was still a bit reluctant to try and find a way through. So my main memory of Jubilee is having a tremendous amount of fun writing episodes 1 to 3, and then episode 4 being something where I was trying to make it all fit, and I don't think that works, but that's okay, I suppose. I mean, it did lead to me writing for the TV series, so I can't regret Jubilee, but I think it's probably my weakest. I think it's my weakest story.
You must get some rest, Miriam. It's a long day tomorrow.
Yes.
A long, glorious, exciting, wonderful, marvellous...
Miriam, that is enough.
Doctor, I can't believe you just said that. Oh, did I put my foot in it again? What's that?
We can play with you gently or play with you until you break. You have no right to pride.
Well, the TARDIS doesn't seem to agree with you. She's trying to move again. What's wrong? Well, she can't. For some reason, she's stuck here.
Stay where you are, Evelyn Smythe.
Like it or not, you will be my ally.
Doctor, the doors. They can't decide whether to stay open or closed.
Get out, Evelyn!
Good friends, you and I.
You are my prisoner.
Sleep tight.
Take care of the Daleks, don't bite.
Isn't it funny, because as you say, this is the one that got you to write for Doctor Who, but you put it as your weakest. I think, actually, Dwayne would probably agree that I think your first 3 episodes are just standout, and the fourth one, I can see, I understand what you're saying, in terms of it's a little bit in terms of trying to work out how to put pieces together, and actually coming back in 10 episodes' time would have been great.
Well, I mean, I hadn't heard Jubilee back. I mean, I don't hear them back very often. I've never heard actually my the one-off I did for the John Sessions and Colin Baker, because I had toothache at the recording. I was in a bad mood, and I just don't want to hear it, which is stupid. I only heard Jubilee back when I was doing my novelization of Dalek. I thought, I should listen to this because there might be some things in it which I can use. I thought, this is a nasty piece of work, and I quite enjoyed it. And then, but I was surprised by how unpleasant it was at Wim parts, and I'm not sure that some of the unpleasantness is now justifiable. It seemed okay at the time, but particularly the way in which Jubilee was trying to. I'd written the play, as I say earlier in the conversation. I wrote a play called Easy Laughter, which was the thing which attracted the Acheborns to take me on. And it's a really nasty play about how in a sort of totalitarian society, you will victimize women. And, that's how you can start to tell that that's where your racism begins, and is basically upon the fact that people just harm anybody at all and trying to subjugate, So I tried the same joke in Jubilee. I mean, I wanted to have the idea that there's something really brutal going on, and the idea of writing now a woman who kind of gets off on the idea that she's being beaten up. I'm not sure that that's something which I think that needs a lot of explanation, and I don't think that the play really does it. I don't know. I mean, I think it's of its time, things like that, but I now read them or hear them and just think, yeah, I think my heart was in the right place doing it. I came from a very angry place, actually, but I think it now feels very much like that's a very, very dark thing to go into without daring to explain it better. So it's a strange one, Jubilee. I mean, as I say, it's the one which got me onto the TV show, and of course, very, very quickly after it was written. I mean, Jubilee was written late 2002, and by the end of 2003, I was asked to do Russell's TV show. So it was only a year later. So it was,
how did that come about? How did you go from writing Jubilee to TV show? What was it that Russell wanted or saw in it?
I'm not entirely sure, because we never really discussed it much. I'd never met Russell. I heard, the way we all did, about the show coming back in September, I want to think, 2003-ish. It was around that sort of time. And I was so excited because I'm a Doctor Who fan. And people said to me, you think you'll be on it? And I said, not a chance, because I'm not a very experienced TV writer. I mean, basically, it was being sacked off Born and Bred with Chris Chibnall that was my big TV claim to fame, because I didn't do very well on that show. And then my agent gave me a call one day and said, Russell T. Davies has phoned up, or the production team, anyway, maybe it was Julie, and they'd like to invite you to write episode 6 of the new series. And I said, what, you mean? And they want to interview me. I said, no, you're being offered episode 6, and they want it to be a Dalek story, and do you want to say yes? And I said, yes. She said, because you had said that because I had said to my agent before that after Born and Bred, I wanted to move into trying to do my own shows rather than working on other people's. So she hadn't accepted the job for me. And I said, no, you got to call them back. And of course I'll do it. And of course, they were out. And so it became this sort of rather panicky thing that even going along to my first meeting at the BBC, I entered the room and I thought that Russell would take one look at me and said, oh, no, I didn't want you. Because why would he? But we sat down and he said he'd really enjoyed Jubilee and we'd like to do a Dalek story. And then they showed me some pictures of Daleks on a TV screen, some animation. I said, we can do this and you're doing it. And they all laughed and I laughed. I thought it was incredible. We're bringing back Doctor Who and I'm doing the Daleks. And I said, so what do you want from Jubilee? I mean, do you want Jubilee? And Russell said, no, I don't really. And he said, I quite like some of the ideas. I like that Dalek juice, that you boil a Dalek. And I said, yeah, that's not going to work. He said, no, that's not going to work either. So we came up in that meeting with the idea that he really liked the idea of a companion having a relationship with the Dalek, with this single Dalek. But unlike with Jubilee, where it was all very Silence of the Lambs, where Evelyn spends a good, hour and a half effectively having conversations with the Dalek, we couldn't afford the time for that on TV. So it was going to be something much more simple, like Rose touching it. And that would be the sort of connecting point, and that'd be much more visual, which meant, we were discussing things like DNA transfer. It was all very strange. And I kept on thinking all the time I was in the meeting, I thought, this isn't, they don't really want me to do this, do they? And I spent the next few months constantly assuming they were going to give me a call and say, we've been thinking about this and we would really rather have somebody else. But they never did. And it actually went out. I mean, I was shocked, really. But we realised very, very quickly that although Jubilee had been what Russell had listened to and had got excited by, it wasn't going to fit. I mean, mostly because Jubilee is specifically a story about what happens if you know the Daleks too well. It's all about basically us as fans not taking the threat seriously anymore. It's like the Nazis in Indiana Jones films, whereas the whole point of the audience for Dalek was going to be an audience who may never know what a Dalek was. We were trying to reach those 8-year-old kids who had never seen it. And so it was a completely, it was the complete reversal of Jubilee. So there wasn't an awful lot we could really take from it. And it's really only that one scene. And when I heard that back when I was doing the novelization, the scene where Colin Baker meets the Dalek in the cell, it's nothing. It's nothing at all compared to the Chris Eccleston one, because that became such an important scene for us in the TV, whereas it was just basically a getting out of a cliffhanger, because it wasn't. I mean,
it's a Dalek. It's a Dalek locked up, a Dalek being tortured, about a companion showing compassion. I think there's probably more to it than you're giving it credit for.
I mean, it's. I think it's a tonal thing, as I say. I mean, I was hoping I could. I mean, when I agreed to do the novelization for Target, I thought, well, I can pad it out really by sticking in bits of Jubilee, but it's so tonally wrong for what Dalek is. I mean, it's weird. I mean, people, a lot of fans, very kindly, I think, knowing that Dalek was a longer, more collaborative effort, will tell me that they far prefer Jubilee. And I think, well, that's kind, but I think Dalek is rather better than Jubilee. I think it's leaner. I mean, I prefer some of the ideas in Jubilee a bit. I mean, I love the craziness of Jubilee sometimes, but I did think at that stage, if I was doing Doctor Who at that point, I was a little bit expansive with my craziness. I think Jubilee is where I just go a bit too far. Although I do love bits. I mean, I think the opening credits, I remember writing that, having such fun writing the stuff that was to go between the episodes. Only one of which actually made the cut because it was too long. But that opening bit where we have the Dalek movie That was fun. I enjoyed that a lot.
All the extras are there. They're sitting on a special release somewhere. I think it's a Big Finish magazine, or I know you can find them all because they're all around. Dalek to me is actually still one of the best structured. I mean, it showed the structure of what the new series could do, and once again, hugely successful, and top of lots of people's lists in terms of the best since the show's come back. Shows that come back.
It's really nice.
Why? I know it had a very troubled history in terms of lots of redrafts, losing the Daleks coming back, etc., etc. So I know it's a very painful process to write and work on.
No, it was fine, actually. I mean, it gets overstaged. I think possibly because, stupidly at the time, I was so tired that I kind of told people how long it had taken. But actually, that was fair. I mean, we all went through it. I mean, that was standard. It was to do with the fact also that you're on the first series, and we had a longer gestation period than most series would have. So what happens with scripts is that you kind of work to fill the time you've got. So if suddenly someone, like with the Big Finish stuff, if someone contacts you and says, we need Chums at midnight, and you've got 2 weeks, you spend 2 weeks writing it. If someone comes to you and they say in 2003, we're doing a new Doctor Who series and it won't be filming probably until this time next year, then you have a year. And what you do in that year is you write it, and then they say, that's great, let's do it again and again, because that's the point. You're still on the show, and there's always something that can be done until they start filming. So I think, every script went through the same process, except probably Stephen's, because Stephen was writing the final series of Coupling and didn't come on and join us on the show until a bit later. But certainly Mark and Paul, we were just doing lots of rewrites because there was time for them, and we were trying to make them as good as possible. My problem mostly really was that we did temporarily lose the Daleks somewhere around draft 5, getting the phone call and telling me that we didn't have the rights to them, so we'd have to rethink the story without Daleks in it. That was a bit of a shock, but it was only about a month where we had that problem, and I went away and I wrote effectively a version of the script. I wanted to do a completely different story for a while, but quite rightly, Russell wasn't keen on that. He said, well, you can just salvage it, and he gave me a new monster to work with, which was the at that point unnamed Toclafane, which was all Russell's idea. He just said, and what we'll do is we'll reveal in the series finale that they are the future Earth people. But in my story, therefore, all I had was basically the Doctor meeting this sort of big floating ball, and he's knowing that had caused the Time War and had killed all the Time Lords, but having never known what they were. And at the end of my story, I wrote it so that the ball died giggling, still refusing to tell him what it was that it actually was. And it was fine, but to be honest, it wasn't that good. I mean, I don't think it would have been that fondly thought of if it hadn't been for a Dalek in it. So, yeah, I mean, it wasn't too painful. It was just a long experience, but that's the nature of TV. The thing I'm working on at the moment, which I'm afraid I'm not allowed to talk about because it's all NDA'd, but I'm on a show at the moment, and those scripts have been going through a process where they've been refined for years, because that's how long sometimes something original takes. So Dalek really was nothing compared to what people do go through.
So would you come back again if you were asked?
What, to the TV show?
Yes, Doctor Who.
I don't know. I suppose it would depend, really. I mean, I don't think they will ask. I mean, it's been mooted a couple of times at different points, but not for quite a long time now. I don't actually think I'd know what to do with it. I think that Doctor Who is far slicker than my TV writing knows how to be. I think my background in theatre and radio is really good and healthy, but I think that, but when I was watching, midway through, watching things like Peter Capaldi's episodes, and the episodes that I really admire, like things like Heaven Sent or listen, or I always just think, I mean, I'd give my eye teeth to write those, but I'm just not that sophisticated. And I think that I'm watching Jodie's stuff as well. I just think that there is a sort of element of pace to the way that the stories are being told now, which if you look at Dalek, just isn't really there. I think I'm a more old-fashioned writer. So I suspect in a way that I'm just not that strong a TV writer now. I mean, maybe I could learn to be again, but I've not been doing TV for a few years. So I think it's like a fast-moving train, the way that TV writing works. And I think if you get off for a while, it's hard to get back on again and be in the top carriage. So I can't imagine that I'd ever be asked back, actually.
Was it thrilling getting to write your target novel of Dalek? Because I mean, it was a great release last year, a great audiobook release. What was it like getting to write the target?
I haven't heard the audio. I mean, Nick has been telling me to listen to it, but
it's great. It's great.
Well, yeah. I always kind of cringe at my own work, so I don't. I can sit through a 45-minute episode. I had to watch Dalek over and over again to write that novel. But I also know that having gone through all that, I'm not sure that I want to hear the novel in painstaking detail, even read by Nick, and I love Nick to bits, but I don't want to hear Nick word by word tell me what I wrote. So perhaps I should listen to bits of it. I'd quite be intrigued to hear how he does certain bits. So maybe I should. I have got the CDs of it because the BBC sent me them. It was odd, actually. I wasn't. I'd always said, if people had said to me in the past, if they ever do novelizations, would you do one? I'd always said no, because I didn't think they made any sense. I always had felt that the novelizations were there to act as replacements for TV episodes that we couldn't at that point easily see. So I didn't believe for a second that we'd ever get novelizations of old episodes. And it was only because I read Day of the Doctor and Rose in that first batch.
They added so much.
And just saw how good they could be, actually. And they didn't have to be this sort of prosaic he said, she said approach. You could do something quite bold with them. And I thought, oh, yeah, okay. I mean, actually, I would really enjoy doing that. And I did. I had a great time with Dalek.
What you did with some of the characters? I mean, you know, the I forget what the character's name is, the torturer, but the whole backstory you gave him, the sociopath, and what he did in his jail time, and it was Malcolm Hulke in terms of it's when you read Colony in Space, Malcolm Hulke adds all these things to these characters, these backstories, and when I read Dalek, it was like reading Colony in Space because you had this backstory to these characters. And suddenly you understood what was going on in them, and you hated them all the more, or liked them all the more.
He was my inspiration for it. I mean, it's hard because, I mean, I think maybe I overdid it. People have pointed out subsequently, and it only occurs to me when I read people saying it, that there isn't much Doctor and Rose in the book because I spend so much time wanting to do these sort of breakaways from the novel to give these strange slants upon characters, which I think is a fair comment. But I don't know, it was funny. I try to find an irony to them so that I kind of always began with the idea that, I mean, Simmons is the guy who gets his head crushed.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be really funny if he was a man who suffered continually from headaches. And it was only in the moment that Dalek does that for a moment his head stops hurting. And I thought that would be a really funny way of something to write. So I thought, so why does he get headaches? And I thought, well, maybe he gets headaches all the time unless he's torturing things. And he's had it since he was a kid. And I thought how awful that would be to be trapped into a situation where you're having to inflict pain upon things just so you're not feeling pain yourself. And from that, I mean, yes, he's a horrible character, but that felt to me like quite a funny in a sort of non-human. Well, yeah, but I thought it just seemed to me like such a sort of funny joke that you would do this entire backstory about basically a man who suffers from headaches all the time and how awful that is. And then when you then have his death later, you get a callback to it. And I thought that justifies my writing that whole chapter. So I was trying to write chapters which led back into characters where there was some sort of strange payoff, even if that meant changing the characters' trajectories. So I suddenly, I gave Van Statten the complex with his father so that he doesn't have the ending he does in the TV episode, but he does become sort of in his mind half dark, constantly trying to exterminate his own father. Thought that was quite funny as well. I mean, it's a fairly I mean, it was enormous fun to go back and just sort of say, how can I make this really quite? I mean, it's like a short story, really, Dark. I mean, they just arrive in this place and run up some stairs. I mean, it's not an awful lot of. I mean, it takes about the amount of time to tell Dalek, probably, as it takes to watch it. I think, I doubt they're there for more than a couple of hours. So to make a novel out of a couple of hours is quite tricky. So I was trying to find ways of sort of bending time and doing stuff. And, what I wanted to tell a story about how Daleks are born. So I thought that would be fun. So, yeah, it's odd. I mean, I was trying to. It wasn't padding, but it was trying to say, how can I make this feel less like a short story? I was quite jealous of things like Day of the Doctor, because I thought that feels like a novel. There's so much going on in this, and there's so much variety, and it seems to take place over all of time and space with multiple doctors, and there's Gallifrey, and there's Earth, and there's Elizabeth I, and there's the Zygons, and whereas my story, I felt coming into it was, it was people running up some stairs. So I really wanted to try and find some sort of angle.
The Doctor awoke to the lights in the laboratory flashing on and off as the electricity surged and fell. He heard Goddard's panic as she shouted over the intercom that this was an emergency. Condition red. Condition red. And Van Statten was shaking him, and at long last the little man looked afraid.
"Release me," said the Doctor, "if you want to live."
The Dalek was screaming once more, not in pain this time, but in triumph.
"Genetic material extrapolated,"
it exulted.
"Am initiating cellular reconstruction."
Rose backed away in horrified wonder as the creature rebuilt itself. The eerie golden glow that surrounded it was dazzling. It seemed to be offering new life and new hope, but what else besides? And through it, she could see the dents of the casing smooth away, the deep gashes cut into the sides fusing back together. The chains that had held the creature down were snapping one by one like thread. She felt an arm pull at her, and she began to fight it off, but it was Adam, dragging her towards the door, towards safety.
"What the hell have you done?"
shouted Simmons. He ran to the Dalek, trusty drill in hand. He stared as even the Dalek's snapped arm healed itself, the broken stick reforming, becoming strong. Its silly little sink plunger pointed straight up at him.
"And what are you going to do with that?" he sneered. "Sucker me to death?"
It was as if the Dalek decided to take his suggestion. The arm extended, and the sucker was on his face now, closing hard over his mouth. Then he could feel the sucker squeeze, and he'd always supposed it was made out of rubber, but it really was nothing remotely like rubber at all. And the headache was back. Little Aaron Denton's headache was reporting in, present and correct.
"Did you miss me?" it screamed at him. "Did you think I'd ever really gone away?"
And he supposed he had missed the headache somehow. They had defined him. He almost welcomed the pain as an old friend. Aaron felt the sucker was on the move, wriggling further across his face. It had tiny fingers. They were grabbing for purchase and then pulling the sucker up, now over his nose, over his eyes, a burning oil slick pouring up his nostrils and into his tear ducts, and squeezing. The headache got louder and wider than he had ever known it. The pain was his entire world. And Aaron didn't know whether to laugh or to scream. And he didn't do either because he wasn't able to do either. The Dalek sucker had pooled over his entire face by now. He couldn't see, he couldn't breathe. Still squeezing, ever tighter. It was an ecstasy of agony. There was no end to it. And then there was. At last there was, because Aaron heard something crack, and he idly wondered whether it was his skull. And at last, the headache was cured.
Let's go back to Big Finish. To talk about Deadline was for one of the Unbound series with Derek Jacobi. So Derek Jacobi.
Yeah.
How did it come about to write an Unbound?
I was invited again. It was a stage where I was just writing lots. I mean, I knew I was coming to the end. I didn't want to write too many more. Deadline was my final one. I wrote it, and I just wanted it to be a sort of a really nice goodbye. And it was, Jason approached me about this new series where they wanted to tell different sorts of Doctor Who stories, these sort of what ifs. And my what if was quite conceptual, really. It was just about what if the show had never been made, or had been cancelled at the pilot stage. And it was my excuse really to try and write what felt like a typical Radio 4 drama, the stuff I was normally doing, but obsessed with the history of Doctor Who. So it was full of Doctor Who jokes about the Hartnell years and things that, you know, I mean, I remember there being a really stupid joke that only is relevant to me, but I could never quite remember the nationality of Sidney Newman. So I made it so that he had multiple nationalities, which is a stupid joke. There's jokes about Christopher Bailey, I think, and Robert Holmes. I mean, I think that there's the whole idea of them he's being interviewed by Doctor Who magazine, effectively, about the Juliet Bravo episodes. And, you know, just kind of being aware that he wasn't a very popular writer for this show. And I don't know, I was surprised when it came out. I thought it was quite funny. That's always my excuse for everything. I thought it was quite funny. I remember it really annoying a lot of fans when it was released, because it seemed to be mocking them and attacking Doctor Who. And it wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be a very affectionate study, really, about how awful it would be if Doctor Who hadn't been there. So all the bitterness wasn't about Doctor Who. It was about the absence of Doctor Who. It was about how this man was choked with a sense of pointlessness.
It's probably the most stage play one that you've written. I mean, I think you could put this on stage without a problem.
Probably, yeah. I mean, it felt very, as I say, it has a structure of being, I think afternoon plays for Radio 4 have a stage play-like feel as well sometimes, you know, sort of longer scenes and, you know, not suddenly zipping off and doing strange things across time and space. And yeah, I just wanted to write something of that sort of pace. And then, of course, we got Derek Jacobi, which was, you know, extraordinary, because I'm a massive Claudius fan. And he was such a nice chap. I mean, he was so nice to work with. He was very, very giggly, and he just seemed to really enjoy the script. And we spent 2 days on it rather than the usual one, because we just wanted to work with him for longer. So we took a really long time on it, rehearsing it, and it was such a lovely cast as well. And Peter Forbes and Jackie King, before she became Donna's mum in the TV show. Yeah, I mean, Deadline was my happiest experience. And I was kind of allowed to co-direct it, which was really nice too, because it was so much more like theatre, and I do direct theatre. So it was, I mean, that's the one I probably feel proudest of. But I also know that it's probably, it's the least Doctor Who amongst them, so maybe that's not fair. But and I think maybe that's why people were disappointed by it as well. It doesn't. I think the other Doctor Who's in that set feel like Doctor Who stories. I mean, Exile maybe not so much. Nick's maybe misjudged one where he has a drunk female doctor. That one didn't really float anyone's boats either. But I think
the Killer David Collins one wasn't popular. I mean, they were deliberately exploring different things, and they successfully did that.
Yeah, and I mean, I stand by Deadline. I'm genuinely very proud of it, and I've not heard it for many years, but I remember hearing that one back and saying, unlike the others, where there's always something that you wish you could change, I think, yeah, I like that. I think I'm proud of that. But I understand why it doesn't necessarily work for everybody. But yeah.
look like the Alps.
Indeed not, my child. What's going on?
It's a petrified forest.
On a dead planet?
Oh dear, this doesn't look like the basis for an educational history series at all. Sidney Newman will be most put out.
Look, Grandfather, footprints, like green stains on the forest floor. Hard to the touch.
And the smell like nothing on earth.
You mucky pup, that'll take ages to shift.
And on that tree, look, claw marks gouging out the wood.
What shall we do, Grandfather? Should we follow the footprints?
It all seems evidence of some terrifying beast. I think we should go back to the ship and find Hannibal.
Too late!
It's a monster.
It has the eyes of a bug.
Oh dear, a bug-eyed monster. Next episode, Universal Domination Most Foul.
In terms of scary stories, your most terrifying story to me personally is Scherzo. So there is some sound design in there that absolutely gets right in your head, and it just, every time I listen to it, makes me jump.
A sort of whine going through it.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But it was written around the time you got married, wasn't it? So is marriage a terrifying prospect for you?
It was terrifying. It still is, really. I mean, but I just had to do it because otherwise I'd have been thrown out. I mean, it got to the stage in our relationship that, it was very much stepping up and taking some sort of adult responsibility, she said. Or, I could just go and camp out in the garden forever and maybe, starve. No, it was an odd thing. I mean, Janie actually was never that fond of the idea of marriage. We sort of stumbled into the idea one day it might be quite a nice thing to do. And I had to write Scherzo. And Gary didn't give me, again, much time. And I was on my honeymoon writing fair bits of it while she was... I mean, I took advantage, really. She got some food poisoning from a crab sandwich in Fort Lauderdale in Florida. And she had to stay in bed for 2 days. And so I had time to kill. So I went down to the swimming pool and began writing Scherzo, which I know it's not the most romantic story, Scherzo. I mean, it's kind of fairly horrible about the sort of suffocating nature of love. But it wasn't how I felt getting married. I mean, it doesn't. I remember giving it to Janie to read, and she sort of raised an eyebrow, and I said, "It's not about us, though, because you have to say that." And it is true, it's not. I mean, it's. In all honesty, what happened was that I was asked to write by Gary this new universe story, and this would be kicking off the thing after Zagreus, but he hadn't written Zagreus. And they didn't write Zagreus for quite some time afterwards. He couldn't, it was a really scary thing to write, I think, for them, because Neverland had been such a huge hit. And then it was going to be the 40th anniversary story. And it had to resolve the Neverland stuff. And it was going to be all the Doctors in it. And I think it just became a hard thing for them to know what to do with. And all they knew was at the very end of it, the Doctor would sacrifice himself into this new universe forever to save Charlie. And then Charlie went in with him. And I said to Gary, well, surely that would really piss him off. And he said, why? And I said, well, why did he sacrifice himself if she's going in anyway? So I spent the entire story kind of trying to write out how annoyed I would be if I've just given up the whole of the universe effectively pointlessly. So getting that sort of emotion into it suddenly became these sort of long discussions about irritation and also, writing myself a bit into a corner. I mean, I really wanted to write a story where it was really honed down after Jubilee, because it was the one after Jubilee. And I felt with Jubilee was so flabby that I thought I should really try and write a story which feels really compressed, and it's just two people talking and exploring things in their own time. And I took it to the extreme of Scherzo. I just thought, well, let's see how long I can sustain people just walking around in a circle.
Make it stop!
I'm sorry, it occurs to me since I'm hiding here from so many nothings and somethings, I don't yet know whether I should be hiding from you as well. Who are you?
Doctor, you know me, I'm Charlie.
Charlie?
Yes. You remember?
Rubbish.
What?
Charlie's safe, I know she is.
It's me, Doctor.
No, Charlie wouldn't betray me. She wouldn't betray me like that.
Doctor! Help! Doctor, it's trying to speak.
Impossible. It's barely evolved a rudimentary nervous system, let alone a means to master conversation.
Help! What are you? We want to help. Help! Yes, we'll do our best to... Help. Doctor?
I don't know. Yes, very good. That's quite enough. You're scaring Charlie. You're scaring me, come to that.
Make it stop!
It's pretty unique. It's a two-hander. So there's no other cast whatsoever. And once again, I mean, Paul and India show their skill as actors in terms of how they pull it off. There's also no incidental music at all, even though it's a play called Scherzo, which is all about music.
It's actually about music, yeah. I mean, when I was taking on my honeymoon textbooks about the history of music, so I wanted to, that was an inspiration. It was all about the way in which we create sound and how sound becomes and evolves into music. And I don't think I ever quite managed to bridge that properly, but that's why the evolution thing is all there. It's all about the idea of just random sounds eventually becoming something which is, alive and that communicates through the sounds that they've already made. And that was fun, I think, but also quite restrictive. And I remember when I finished Scherzo just thinking, that feels terribly bare. We recorded it and Gary sent me the masters of it. And episodes were about 15 minutes long. So I remember saying to Gary, I mean, he may remember this differently now, and he might be right, but I remember asking him whether I could be allowed to give some notes to the sound designers as a means of trying to explain what I wanted so I could elongate things. So I remember at one point, for example, really wanting there to be a really loud noise suddenly in your ear, which I gather is, has caused people to have problems when they're driving and listening to it, because it's suddenly quite explosive. And I think that they made the sound design much more effective because they had the space to use my script as more like a blueprint, because it's not a very long script. I think it could possibly fit it onto one CD. And I think only because of the of doing cleverer things with the sound allowed it to feel like it's properly a four-parter, because it is quite short, because it's hard to sustain, in all honesty. And I think it seems to be quite well remembered now. I remember at the time thinking it was the one that kind of got away, that people didn't like. I remember Nick Briggs hearing it and saying to me, he said, "That's rubbish." And I said, "Is it?" He said, "It's really boring." And I said, "Oh, I did think it might be. I wasn't sure." He said, "No, it's boring." So, I mean, but people now do seem to... I went on Tumblr a few years ago, just briefly, and it was lovely because people were just doing artwork for Scherzo all over the place. And it sort of seemed to have found an audience years afterwards. I think partly because of its themes about love and rejection, and some rather harsh lines in it were being made into little memes and things. And I thought, oh, this actually has found its way forward. It's strange.
It has. I mean, it has absurdist moments. It's Waiting for Godot. It's Happy Days. It's those waiting for something, and the emotion is in the waiting, and just the footsteps and the pauses are significant because it's about building emotion. Though that emotion may often be frustrating, but I think that's what it's supposed to do. I mean, Waiting for Godot is the most frustrating, annoying play in the entire world. But it's supposed to be that. You're supposed to feel the agony and the frustration of the waiting. And I think Scherzo does a similar thing. It's the frustration of love, frustrated, and that emotion comes out in it's not in the boringness, but in in what's happening. The whole nothingness helps evoke the emotion, but people don't like that.
It was kind of also, looking back now, I mean, I'd heard what Zagreus was going to be. I mean, it just hadn't been written, but the ambition of it and how
bigger than
big
Ben-Hur.
And I just thought, whatever I do afterwards, it has to be the opposite. I have to do a story which is incredibly small after Zagreus. I think that would be it's the only contrast you can actually have. And so it was designed to be your sort of post-Zagreus lurch. You just think, oh, this is taking place over how many years? And they're just walking in a circle, eating each other. I mean, it was, looking back, quite strange. But
all your stuff's strange, Robert.
It's probably the strange. It's a strange one, Skirt.
I'm glad you said you're involved in the sound design on that, because I will say, don't listen to it while you're driving, because it's that kind of terror that is in that sound design that I used to feel watching Doctor Who as a kid. So, and I don't get that too often, being grown up supposedly these days. But that feeling that I got with Scherzo and some of those sound stings in my head took me right back to my childhood, and I thought, this is what I love from Doctor Who. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Dwayne. That's really kind. It's a funny one, really, because I just remember thinking, I've got to push this as far as it can go. And it also is the only story of mine I did for Big Finish that wasn't really a comedy. It was trying to iron out all those tics. I mean, months later, I was trying to write Dalek, and again, I went straight back to them. My first drafts of Dalek are just full of larger-than-life characters trying to be a little bit eccentric, which is a bit annoying. But it's what Holy Terror and Chimes and Jubilee do. And Scherzo was trying, just for once, not to do it. I just wanted to try and tell a story which was full of real emotion and quite raw emotion, without it trying to sort of be comically quirky with people with catchphrases and stuff, which I think was what I did so much back then. And, I remember finishing it and thinking, I don't know if this is any good or not at all. I remember being at a Big Finish party just before Scherzo came out, and kind of dreading its release, thinking that people were just not going to like it, because I'd heard it and I'd done, and I sort of tried to encourage the sound design, but I just thought, I think people might find this really, really annoying and not what they want. And I think it was a bit of a shock for people. I mean, not, because of me, but just because of anything. I don't think it was what anyone was expecting. And that's good. I mean, it has a great cover as well, which is so spare. And, and I'd, Steve, I can't remember his surname. That's so annoying. The artist.
Sound designer?
The cover design of Scherzo. I'd sort of complained to him that all my covers were quite dark because I had to autograph them at conventions and I could never quite get my name on. And Scherzo is this sort of strange white hand meshing thing. And it's beautiful, but it's also sort of sums up the story. It's kind of just
Johnson,
empty.
His name? Steve Johnson.
Steve Johnson, lovely chap, very, very talented. And he designed such a beautiful cover for that. I mean, I think now Scherzo is probably, I don't know, it seems like the story that actually, in a funny way, I feel, it's not my favourite, but I feel quite proud that we did it. It's
inventive
at the time. But even when we recorded, I remember Paul being very wary of it, and it was like a gift for India. I'm very fond of India, and I remember thinking how wonderful she was in Chimes. So I wanted to give her this special present, really, which was this sort of strange, absurdist drama that would give her a chance to spend a lot of time with Paul and stretching and stuff. And I think that she really enjoyed it. But Paul, I remember at the end of a week, because that wasn't, I think they did Scherzo the last of that series, just looking at it and saying, what is this? Because it wasn't what he was used to. And they did it and he was fine. I don't think he enjoyed it. And I think it's that funny thing that no one really enjoyed making Scherzo at all. But it seems that it has now its own particular flavour, which I'm very proud of, actually. You know, and it's a good way to sort of say goodbye as well, really.
Well, I was going to say, after 6 stories of 6 main stories in about 3 years, you disappeared for 4 years, and then you just came back for a single episode.
That's true.
A story, My Own Private Wolfgang. What enticed you back for one story?
Oh, it's the story 100. It's a very, and also it was Nick. You know, and Nick is one of my best friends, and later on I was his best man, and and I'd never really worked with Nick particularly because I kind of stopped doing Doctor Who. I felt also, having done Dalek, I didn't want to do the easy thing and slide back into doing Doctor Who stuff, because I thought I thought that would look a bit backwards. If I wasn't going to do any more TV, I shouldn't go and write the comics. I mean, I did. I spent some time around the Dalek year making sure I could do some annual stories. I did a comic for Doctor Who magazine, but I thought I will ride this, and then once Chris is gone, I will just depart. And I did, and I was happy to do so. And then, of course, 2007, just a couple of years down the road, they reached their 100th release, and they wanted to bring back some popular favourites, and they brought back Jack Rayner, and they brought Joe Lidster, who's great, of course, was at that point doing Sarah Jane, and they got Paul Cornell, and I felt honoured to be one of them. And it was just great fun also to be doing another Doctor and Evelyn, because I love Maggie Stables so much. She's such a sweet woman. She's always so kind to me. And Colin was my doctor to write for. And I thought, yeah, I can do 25 minutes. And it was fun. And it's a fairly, I don't remember it very well. As I say, I've actually never heard it. But what I remember was it was a bit of a joke about Big Finish, which was, and it's a bit of a cruel joke, really, when you bear in mind also how many they've actually done since. But I was saying in the story, the thing about Mozart is he knew when to stop. If Mozart had just carried on and on and on for hundreds and hundreds of years, we'd just find him a bit boring now. So it was kind of my way of saying, you reached 100 stories, but we've got the new series going. Why are you still making them? Bye. Which I think is a very, very rude thing to do. But no one minded. I mean, Nick read it and got the joke and said, yeah, great. But they still made it. And it's all right. I mean, it feels like a sort of nice little epilogue to Big Finish for the time being. I mean, it'd be one day I might pop back.
I was going to say, if you were asked, would you come back?
I've been asked a few times. I've been asked a few times this year. The awkwardness, honestly, and it's not meant to be an arrogant thing. It's not about, I hope that. But when I was doing Big Finish, they felt, because there were so few of them, there was a certain sort of degree of moment to them, that they had a sort of momentous feel. I mean, I remember when Holy Terror came out or Chimes came out, that there was a joy in thinking that I owned this month, that this was the month in which my story would come out, and for 1 month only, with no show on the air, with that never coming back, I kind of owned Doctor Who. I was the most recent Doctor Who story. The difficulty, I think, now is that there's so much, and it's so good, some of it. I mean, I'm currently, for fun, I've not done it before. I thought I'd listen to the first Doctor adventures, so I'm working my way through the David Bradley series at the moment, and they're terrific and they're lovely. But I also know that the impact they make is the impact that you can only make if you're one of many things at the same time. And if I could do a Doctor Who where I could come back and I feel that it could be something where I could be doing something big, not out of ego, but out of the need, I hope it's not ego, but to actually sort of justify my doing it again, I'd do it. But I don't know. I think I'm aware that if I did another story, it would just be inevitably just one more story released that month. And I don't know. I kind of want to find a way of doing something a bit bigger than that. But why should I? I mean, I'm not pretending or asking Big Finish that they should allow me to be some sort of totem. I don't know. It's simply now the concern I have about there being so many stories that it's just one more on the list. And to force myself back into finding how to write Doctor Who again, just to realise that actually no one's really listened to it yet, because they've got the Peladon box set to listen to, and the Lone Centurion series, and the Adventures of Rose Tyler, and just being aware that you're one more product feels a bit... I'm aware, as I'm saying this, it sounds horribly churlish, so maybe I should... I mean, it's not a big finish. I think, honestly, I think that what Nick and Jason and Gary, back in the day too, have accomplished is as remarkable a success in many ways as the TV show itself. I think that, back when Verity Lambert started Series 1, if she could have imagined it was going to run for 26 series, that would be beyond anyone's ability to think. The fact that Jason and Nick and Gary have started something which is already reaching that same milestone and will go on beyond that. I mean, they're going to, I'm sure, do more than 26 years of it. And the amount of stories that they produce and the whole range of storytelling, and the fact that there is so much, the fact that actually we've reached a point where you cannot digest all of Doctor Who, largely down to them, is a remarkable achievement, which people don't sing often enough. If Big Finish weren't there, it wouldn't just be like a sudden gap. It would be a deafening silence because what they do is so remarkable. But I suppose, since I'm just waffling on, I think the difficulty I have is that I listen to some of them now. I listen to the works of people like John Dorney or Matt Fitton, Lisa McMullen. I mean, I think they're all so good, and I think they're better than I am. And I do think that there's a worry that I'd come back expecting to be celebrated because I got so lucky with my original 6. And I think I'd find it really hard to take that actually I was producing work that was better, that wasn't particularly good. And people will be disappointed, and I'd be disappointed. And I don't really see what any of us would get out of the transaction.
I think you have a voice and a style and a tone which is different to any other author. So in terms of trying to compare yourself, trying to compare yourself with any of those amazing writers you've just spoken about, I think what you would bring is different. Anyhow, your choice. And can I say, I know lots of people, including myself, who would adore some more work from you because we love what you do, and I love your black humor. I love the comedy you bring, and there's no other writer that writes like you. And so what you would do would always be unique.
As I say, it is tempting, and one day I'm going to give in to it. It's if I can just find the right thing to do, because everyone is always very, very kind to me, and they're my friends. I mean, they've been so good to me over the years, Big Finish. I mean, they published a couple of my short story collections. They've always been my mates. People sometimes worry that there's bad feeling, and there isn't. There really isn't. I mean, they are the most fun people to spend time with. If I'm at a convention, I'm always hanging around with all the Big Finish guys, and they're always, which again is rather good for my ego. So many of the writers who come into it now, knowing that I did my ones, and Chimes get so, praised, and it's 20 years ago. So they look at me as some sort of, grand statue, and that's rather wonderful and undeserved, but it's lovely. So there's always a sense that I would, I'd never want people to think that there was in any way, any sort of regrets about it. It's just, I think I'm a bit scared to go back to it and just not do it as well, because I never quite did one that people thought was rubbish. It'd be awful to do one now that was.
So what, do you want to tell just very briefly what are you doing at the moment? What are you working on? What's your passion at the moment?
Well, I finished a book just about a year or so ago, which I'm still sort of promoting, which was really crazy, called We All Hear Stories in the Dark, which is this War and Peace.
3 volume set.
Yeah, it's a labyrinth of short stories, and I'm working upon something else to do with that at the moment. I'm script consulting for a new TV series I'm not allowed to talk about, which is frustrating. I'm hoping to get further on with my new novel soon, which was in some ways stopped a bit because I have to research it abroad by the pandemic. But I can probably work around that now. There are things I've just been made, which is rather lovely. A senior fellow at the University of Lincoln, which is great. And apparently it means I will go and talk to students at Lincoln University fairly regularly and about creative writing and do workshops and things. And that should be fun because it's just something where I can give something back. So, I mean, I'm quite busy, but I'm not producing very much at the moment that is ready to come out. But there will be soon. I mean, I think that you'll see my name on some stuff in the not too distant future. So that's quite exciting. It's been a strange long pandemic, though, hasn't it?
It has been too long.
It has been too long,
and we've lost all sense of time in the process.
Yeah.
Well, as I kind of say, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate the time you've given us, and it's been fascinating to talk to you again. And
thanks, Philip.
Really looking forward to seeing what comes next.
Cheers. Thank you very much. And thanks, Dwayne.
Thank you, Rob. This has been the Sirens of Audio episode 111, From Dull to Lek, with our guest Robert Shearman and your hosts Philip Edney and Dwayne Bunny. Theme music by Joe Kramer. Contact us or check out all our details at sirensofaudio.com. You can drop us a line at sirensofaudio@gmail.com or drop us a comment on our socials or our YouTube channel. We love interacting with you. Thanks for listening, audiophiles. We'll catch you next time.